Let's have a big hand for Steve Evelyn.
Get this back down to Hobbit height. Before I moved here, I lived in Chicago and worked as an actor there, and did okay, you know. But I still had to have the proverbial day job. So I worked as a temp. So, you know, where you would go in for a week and work at a bank, and then the next week you'd go in and work at a different bank, and it was fine. You know, it was decent money and it was flexible, so I could go out on auditions or whatever. And I had a really good relationship with the owner, and she was always looking out for me. And one day she called me, and every now and then she'd throw me a curveball. So this was December, I think, like 2004, 2005, and she says, "I've got a job for you, but I'm not sure you're going to want to do it." I said, "Well, what is it?" Long pause, which is never a good sign. And I said, "Well, what is it?" And finally she said, "There's a law firm down here in the Loop who they're looking for people to dress up in costume and walk around their Christmas party entertaining the kids." I was not a kid person at this point. And I said, "No, that sounds absolutely horrible." And she said, "Well, no, it'll be fine." And I said, "All right, well, dressed up as what?" Long pause. And I said, "Dressed up as what?" And finally she said, "You would be dressed as Mr. Incredible." And I said, "Mr. Incredible?" She said, "You know, from the movie, The Incredibles." Like, I'm aware of the movie. And she said, "Look, it'll be an easy job. You walk around the party for a few hours, you pose for some pictures, you make some decent money for Christmas, and at the end, there's free food and an open bar. And it's the actor's kryptonite." So I said, "All right, fine, I'll do it." So a few days later, I find myself in the conference room, one of the largest law firms in the city of Chicago, wearing a pair of tight black stretchy pants that are not nearly stretchy enough, the overly muscled foam torso and the big giant head of Mr. Incredible. And for the next 3 hours, I'm being led around by the hand by a woman dressed as a purple hippo because I can't see anything. Now, what was cool is that if you're in costume, kids love you. All they want to do is hug you, which is awesome. But what I forgot is that kids are like crotch high. So for 3 hours, it was just headshots to the balls. What was even more interesting was the response of the adults, because the women, I was hit on by some really hot drunk women who never saw my face, which could have worked out really well. And they would come up and say, "Well, what other parts of you are incredible?" But the guys were all threatened, and they'd be like, "You don't look so incredible to me, tough guy." So this, sadly, was not my first foray into the world of costumed entertainment. When I was in college, my summer before my senior year, I went to Drake University in Des Moines, and they decided to have a summer theater company, and they paid us, which was great, but in order to prepare us for the real world, they didn't pay us enough to survive, so we all had to get second jobs. So I was working at this theatrical supply store in Des Moines, and you could buy, you know, tap shoes, ballet shoes, that kind of stuff. But their biggest moneymaker was a balloon delivery service, where you would order a bouquet of balloons, and they would be delivered by someone dressed up like a gorilla or whatever. So I was hired to work the counter and make balloon deliveries. So the place was owned by this woman named Betty. And when I say woman, I mean hag. And when I say hag, I mean evil, soul-sucking hag. She was just this miserable creature. And she was about 4'3", but she had a beehive that made her about 5'7". And the rumor was that the beehive is where she stored all of her employees' hopes and dreams. So Betty calls me, I'm there like a week, and Betty calls me in and she says, I have a balloon delivery. And I'm actually excited because I'm thinking, finally I'll get to dress up like Batman, because who doesn't want to dress like Batman, right? So she says, I have a delivery for you, and I say, Batman? And she says, no, Chippendale's Dancer. Now, let's pause here for a second. At the time, I was in only slightly better shape than I am now. So imagine this without any of this. The lesson is, lasagna is not a breakfast food. So I said, I'm not comfortable with this. And she said, you're the only one here, I gotta have it done, you're my guy. And I can't lose the job, but I said, all right, well, what am I supposed to do? And she said, here's a boom box, take this with you when you get there, push play, take off your shirt and dance. I said, I don't dance. She said, you're an actor. Actors dance. So, all right, fine. So I go over to this place, I find the woman, they've got us in some room, her friends are all in there, I push play, You Can Leave Your Hat On by Randy Newman comes on. And so I take off my shirt and I'm doing one of these and she looks horrified and I look horrified. The people behind us all look like, you know, some homeless guy came in and took a dump on the desk. I finish and I go up to her and I say, if I were you, I would call the store and demand my money back. Clearly, this was horrifying for both of us. So I get back to the store and I say, well, that will never happen again. And it didn't for a while. So a week or so later, Betty called me and she says, I have a delivery for you. And I said, Batman? And she said, no, Giant Raisin. Now, who remembers the California raisins, right? But the thing with these costumes, they were all unlicensed. So she couldn't call it a California raisin. She had to call it a West Coast dried grape. So I go to this elementary school in West Des Moines. I give the balloons away, it's great. The thing about these costumes, there are no pockets. You don't think about that, but there are no pockets. So a guy I worked with gave me great advice. He said, always keep change in your shoes, because this was pre-cell phone, and put your car keys in there. That way you don't have to worry about, you know, someone stealing your car. So I go in, I do the thing, I come back out, it's raining. I go to get, I get to the car, I look in my shoe, there's no key. So I look in the other shoe, and there's no key. I look through the window, and they're dangling from the ignition. Who all's done the walk of shame? Who all's done it dressed like a raisin? So I go back to the school, I say, hey, can you call the cops? Because at this point they would still come out and unlock your car. I go back out, 15 minutes, standing in the rain, the cop pulls up, he sees me, a 5'9" raisin, standing there, doesn't say a word, just looks at me, shakes his head, unlocks the car, and drives away. Back to the store, tell him what happened, ha, funny, funny raisin boy. So, a couple months go by, Betty calls me in, I've got a job for you, I've got a delivery for you. I say, Batman? She says, no, Giant Raisin, don't lock your keys in your car. It's Monday morning, 9 a.m. I have to be in Ankeny, Iowa, which is a suburb of Des Moines. I find the guy at the hardware store, give him his balloons, go out to my car, look in my shoe, no key. Look in my other shoe, no key. Look through the windshield, and there in the ignition are my keys. So if you're standing next to me at this point, what you would hear coming from behind 6 inches of foam would be, are you kidding me? I cannot go back into the hardware store. It's humiliating, right? So I look across the street and there's this guy opening up a bar. I think, perfect. It's 9 a.m. There's a phone. No one will be in there. I waddle across the street. I throw open the door, and there, sitting at the bar, are 3 of the oldest farmers I have ever seen in my life. And if this were a film, this is when the needle would go scratching across the record as everything stops. I'm silhouetted in the doorway like John Wayne at the end of The Searchers. They look at me as if Jesus himself walked into a bar while dressed like a piece of dried fruit. So I say to the bartender, "You got a phone?" And he just kind of nods over into the corner. So I go and I make the call, and I leave. I'm heading back to my car, and I see the guys. I'm like, "Gentlemen, gentlemen, gentlemen." Cop shows up, acts like this shit happens all the time. He's like, "Hey, how you doing? What's going on?" Doesn't ask about the raisin costume, just very happy. So I finally get back to the store, tell him what happened. You locked your keys in your car again, raisin boy, funny, funny. The next day, Betty calls me at home, fires me over the phone because she has another Chippendales delivery, and she knows that I won't do it. Now, I was kind of pissed. Not because she fired me, not because, you know, I lost it because of a really stupid reason. I was pissed because I never got to be Batman. So now you'll see people out on the corner in costumes handing out flyers, you know, for a bank or whatever. And people will either ignore them or make some kind of smart-ass comment, or they'll take the flyers. And I'm one of those guys. I take the flyer because I know. I'm in the Brotherhood. I've seen what life looks like from inside the giant head. So one of these days, I am going to go back to that bar in Ankeny, Iowa. I'm going to sit down, I'm going to have a beer, and I'm going to ask the bartender, what is the craziest thing that has ever happened in this place? And have him tell me about the time a giant raisin walked in, used the phone, and then turned the water into wine.